I've been playing a lot of Horizon Forbidden West recently. I was a huge fan of the first game. The second game's story has only added to what I loved about the first. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I'm also completely obsessed with the epic fantasy book series, The Wheel of Time. The more I think about each series side by side, the more I see a striking amount of similarities, not just in the general themes and world building, but also down to small details that compose the characters. If you're a fan of Horizon, it might interest you to see where some of the inspirations for the games may have come from. And if you're a Wheel of Time fan, this video might point you in the direction of an amazing pair of games that almost feel like they could be a future or past turning of the wheel. With that being said, this video will contain spoilers for elements from both stories, so continue at your own risk if you're partway through either one. I'm James Platten, and this is a comparative analysis of Horizon and the Wheel of Time. In both of these stories, cataclysmic events shook the world to incredible degrees, setting humanity back thousands of years as they struggle to try and regain even a shred of knowledge from a once grander civilization. What's more, mankind turns out to be the root cause of each of these apocalyptic conditions. Humans reaching for something greater and more powerful than themselves end up unwittingly unleashing devastation on the world instead. Rather than following the events directly after this, our stories both pick up at least 1,000 years later, as tribes and nations are established across a broken ruin of what was, creating organisations and groups with belief systems based on how they've managed to interpret the little knowledge they have of times past. I heard once that any form of science once sufficiently developed would look like magic to somebody who doesn't understand it. This is a running theme in Horizon, with many of the world's inhabitants fearing ruins of the metal world and seeing technology as a form of magic or religion. It almost makes me wonder if the one power in the Wheel of Time could actually somehow be a technological power. However, it's so far advanced that to our characters' perspectives, they see it as channeling a magical power. What if the wheel, or the creator, is simply a set of subordinate functions like Gaia? She spat out a hero to save the world in its hour of need, just the same as the wheel does with our Ta'Veren. I could see it being quite feasible that both the Creator and the Dark One are actually AI constructs in a different turning of the wheel. This idea of ancient knowledge being lost is also pervasive in both stories, and the concept of how the meaning of words or ideas can become distorted over large periods of time is used heavily to help us understand each world and its history from multiple different perspectives. Speaking of Gaia, let's take a look at the flip side of the coin. Main antagonist in the first game is Hades, an all-powerful AI that the tribe people refer to as a metal demon. During the first game, your interactions with and understanding of Hades is limited to mainly knowing that wiping out life on Earth is its sole objective. The way Hades wants to purge and uses humanity against one another through the Shadow Carja is very reminiscent of the Dark One and Dark Friends in the Wheel of Time. In the second game, an interaction with Hades fairly early on actually has led me to view him more like a Shamael from the books. The conversation you have with the AI as it drones about futility of you not accepting your demise feels like it could be lifted directly from the Great Hunt in one of Rand's dream interactions with the Forsaken. A further realisation for me was that this actually tracks with the plot of the first few Wheel of Time books, which leads you to at first believe that Ishamael is the Dark One before later revealing he's more like the first in command of the Dark One's forces. Bit like Hades and its army of robots. There are a ton of similarities to draw between the Chosen One protagonists of each story, and the first one is that they're both ginger. This might sound like a joke, but it's something that's actually relevant to the way our protagonist is seen by others in the world. Everywhere she goes, people recognise ALOY as the flame-haired Nora, identifying her immediately from that factor alone. This mirrors Rand in a subtle way. For him, red hair is a sign of which tribe of people he's from, so it's used to identify him as one of the Aiel people rather than specifically who he is. Interestingly, it's also most often the incorrect assumption, as early Rand has little to no connection with his Isle heritage. Either way, our protagonists both have red hair that gets constantly mentioned by others. Leading on from the point regarding Rand's lack of connection with his heritage, he was raised outside of his own people's society with barely any knowledge of their ways. Despite this, he does eventually learn more of his people and become aligned with them in his own way. Aloy's journey with the Nora is similar. While she's much more geographically close to them than Rand is with the Aiel, she is still very much apart from her tribe, being raised as an outcast by an outcast, and her father figure, Rost. Aloy never really quite feels like she is a Nora, in the same way Rand denies being an Aiel, but both rely heavily on their respective nations' spears, and wise women to counsel them, even though they probably won't like to admit it. While Aloy struggles with a blurry lineage and the burning question of who her mother was, Rand's internal battle is more centred on whether or not his father is his real father. Interestingly, this aspect doesn't really come up all that much in Horizon, despite the fact that Aloy is also raised by someone to which she has no blood relation. It's not as much of an issue to her. Both characters have mysterious mothers who they never knew though, and both have strong father figures who raised them, despite not being blood related.
Who would have thought the Dragon Reborn would be a fool?
The mystery of Aloy's parentage is solved by the end of the first game. We find out that she was actually created by the robot Gaia, rather than being born naturally. What's more, Aloy is actually a clone with the same genetic markup as the old world's saviour, the woman who created Gaia in the first place. Rand, of course, is the Dragon Reborn. In the Wheel of Time, everything is cyclical, and reincarnation is a concept that's accepted as truth in the world. Most prominently, the Dragon Reborn is a fated hero who has the power to either save or destroy everything, and is reborn during humanity's greatest hour of need to confront the Dark One. This is where the interesting connection comes from, as Gaia's entire reason for creating Aloy was the incoming threat of Hades about to wipe out life on Earth. Both of our protagonists were spun out into the world to save it from an incomprehensible threat, reincarnations of past heroes, and the only ones that could do their respective jobs. This next point is a bit more theory crafting than hard evidence, but I believe that Aloy could be what is known in the Wheel of Time as a Ta'Veren. Those who don't know, Ta'Veren manipulate chance merely by their presence, meaning things happen around them that usually would only once in 100 times. Essentially, they make the unlikely chances much more likely, but it's not necessarily something they have control over. They're also able to shift the course of people's lives dramatically, having a greater effect than others on the world around them. Simply put, they are of great importance to the pattern. Rand, of course, is a very strong Ta'Veren, and we see examples of it affecting events and people around him through the entire series. My theory is that Aloy could be a Ta'Veren herself. It's not that Ta'Veren is a concept established or even hinted at or mentioned in the Horizon series, but more an observation on how people interacting with her behave. It seems a lot of the time in dialogue with NPCs that they say more than they quite meant to, admitting things that they wouldn't have to another questioner, or stumbling and showing weaknesses where they wouldn't usually have them. We also see a bunch of examples of how deeply Aloy's actions affect the world around her on a larger scale. On much the same terms as Rand, she brings change to the people, shifting threads around her without trying to or meaning to. This could just be an effect of trying to make the player feel more important in the world, but in my head, Aloy is a Ta'Veren through and through. I would also argue that Hikaru, a non-player character met in the second game, could be Ta'Veren as well, as could be Silence. The last similarity I'd like to touch on between our heroes is a behavioural trait that seems to be nurtured by their respective cultural upbringings. Both Aloy and Rand are very stubborn and headstrong. Both the Nora Embrace and the Two Rivers are fairly secluded areas with their own shut-off societies and views of the world. To everyone else, these lands are an almost forgotten corner of humanity. Both the Nora and Two River folk are stuck in their ways, resistant to change, and rarely leave home. They are content to remain in their safe, quiet space where little from the outside bothers them, and due to this, their people all end up being incredibly stubborn. After all, if everything's good at home, Why go elsewhere? You're as likely to hear that logic coming from a Nora's mouth as an Emmons Fielder, and just as unlikely to be able to change either of their minds. Aside from the Nora and Two Rivers having similarities, there are other cultures in each story that also have some intercrossing connections. I felt that I saw more examples of this in the cultures showcased in Forbidden West than I did in Zero Dawn, as each of the respective tribes in the second game felt like they had a match with a faction in the Wheel of Time. The Tenakth are comprised of multiple warring clans, much like the Aiel. Not only are they dangerous warriors, they are bound by their honour and respect for their own customs. A properly issued challenge from one Tenakth to another will only be concluded when one of them lays dead. Much the same, the Aiel are bound by Jiato, their concept of honour and shame. There are a lot of intricate rules and workings to Jiato, despite the Aiel believing it to all be common sense. Aiel clans are constantly fighting one another and feuding over water and shade. This concept is actually explored quite deeply in the Desert Clan of the Tenakth, where ALOY investigates a water shortage that leads to a challenge of leadership. That whole quest line felt like it could have fit right into the Aiel waste. The Utaru tribe feel almost like a mishmash of the Tinkers and Neogia. While not explicitly opposed to violence, they seem to prefer more natural ways of handling things, and accept that each of them will eventually return to the earth that birthed them. Each Utaru even carries a little pouch of seeds to be planted when they die, and this sort of philosophy closely resembles the way of the leaf, for all living things must live and die to live again. Also integral to both Tinker culture and the Ogia ways is a form of singing. The Tuatha are driven by their search for a mysterious song that can bring peace back to the world, harmony, and the Ogia sing to trees so that they should bloom and thrive. Singing is a huge part of Utaru culture too, with their council of sorts being called the chorus, and beautiful vocalization can be heard rolling over the land surrounding settlements. Approaching Plainsong made me feel almost like I was walking into an Ogia grove in the steading. A third group Aloy meets in the Forbidden West are the Quen. Foreigners come from across the sea on great ships to find knowledge of the old world. From the first moment I met the Quen in game, they gave me the ridiculous amounts of Seanchan energy. The Seanchan in Wheel of Time are also a foreign armada, come back across the sea to spread their empire. The Seanchan have an empress, and the Quen an emperor. They also sent an initial voyage across the sea, rather than their whole forces. They also both have super creepy, probably not quite sane leaders amongst them who are obeyed without a second thought by their lessers and ultimately feared. Their leader, Sio, is about as stupid and intolerable as Seraphin Tarak from the Wheel of Time books, and the feeling of slavery wafted off the Quen in spite of me not seeing any direct evidence. They also are visually quite distinct from the other tribes of Horizon, looking out of place or like they're from a different world. This further mirrors the Seanchan, who are described almost like aliens or insects by those with no familiarity. The final main faction we're introduced to in the Forbidden West are the Far Zeniths, who are very much the equivalent of the Wheel of Time's Forsaken. In each story, these people are immortal beings, alive since the previous age. In the Far Zeniths' case, they spent the past 1,000 years on a different planet, languishing in their own hedonistic desires. The Forsaken, on the other hand, have spent a few thousand years trapped in a metaphysical prison known as the Ball. Both groups are comprised of the most powerful, influential, rich, and reprehensible members of society, driven by evil and selfish goals. They are also, for this reason, not very good at working together and have their differences. One particular Far Zenith, known as Tilda, gave me an odd vibe from the get-go. It wasn't until one of the final revelations in Forbidden West that I realised she's basically Lanfear from the Wheel of Time, just a crazy ex-girlfriend who thinks she owns the reincarnation of her long-lost love. My overall conclusion is that at least some of Horizon's designers must have been influenced by the Wheel of Time. There's simply too many familiar tidbits to discover that make me think of the Wheel of Time, from ancient overgrown skyscrapers to stubborn ginger reincarnations. Every element of this game feels somewhat touched by the Wheel's influence. Perhaps I'm wrong, and none of the developers have ever read or heard of the Wheel of Time, but as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about the series outside of its own scape, I've wondered a lot about what the 4th, fifth or sixth age of the Wheel of Time would look like. And each time I wonder about these ages of the past, and these ages of the future, I feel like Horizon could fit just perfectly within the constructs that define the turning of the wheel. But what do you think? Have you noticed anything I didn't that links Horizon and the Wheel of Time? Let me know in the comments anything that I might have missed. And if you're a fan of both stories, then I'd just love to get your general opinion on this topic, as I feel there's a lot of depth to the discussion. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like below, it really helps the channel. And subscribe for regular Wheel of Time content, from animated music videos to live coverage of my board game, Third Age. Tai'Shar YouTube, see you next time.